Okay, I will now start the share. This one. And let me get the screen right. I don't need the format. And I think I can move it through without a slide only. Okay, resize a little bit. Okay, this is the third meeting of this term, and today we are looking at the um, efforts in Asia. Now, there is a pretty obvious interactions between China and the rest of the world. As we have discussed before, China doesn't use military means, and China is also a non-alliance, aliens, whatever we call it, country. That means it will not enter into treaties with other countries. So the relationship with all other countries can be looked at in two directions. One is from my friendship directions, partnerships. So, for example, the Chinese had different levels of partners. The partners is more akin to our friend relationships. That means we will support each other when the conflict, there's no mutual, put it other way. When we establish a friendship with somebody else, basically that means we have a lot of commonalities between us so that we can discuss things, we can cooperate. But that cooperation is not mandatory. The cooperation depends on each individual circumstance and each individual instance. But whenever there's no conflict in terms of a baseline, for example, sovereignty, etc., then we support each other. So this is one level of relationship China promotes with other countries. The second relationship is trade. People argue, oh, China's trade is kind of new colonization. But we must understand, if the trade is voluntary between two parties, then both parties will benefit from the trade. If there's no benefit from the trade, then obviously we won't have an agreement and we won't trade. So when we talk about trade, we obviously consider both parties having benefits. Sometimes maybe the benefit is more one-sided than the other, but anyway, for example, recently the United States has accused China of over capacity. For example, in the area of solar panels. Yes, at the moment, China is manufacturing about 80% to 90% of the global supply of solar panels. But that only means that the other companies is not able to compete with China in terms of either quality or price. When we trade with China in terms of solar panels, we get cheaper solar panels at a better quality at the same price point. Whether it's at this price point, the quality is better, or for the same quality, China offer a lower price point. Therefore, we trade, because if we are able to produce the same with lower cost, we will not buy from China. So when a trade is voluntary, it also means that both parties benefit, because you will benefit from lowering the cost of the product you want. Another example is, of course, is the EV, electric vehicles. Most of the manufacturing vehicles in China is consumed in China itself. Only a small percentage is exported. At the moment, inside China, the waiting list for electrical vehicles is about 6 months. So if you place an order on a electric vehicles, you expect to up to 6 months before the vehicle is delivered. That means the demand in China is not satisfied at the moment, but still thinking long term, wanting to have a presence in other significant global market. So the manufacturers actually do put aside a fraction of the production for export. So we look at China's relationship with the world in these two angles. Then we can look at it in terms of the Chinese effort in Asia. Now, China is a very old country in one sense, but a very new country in the other sense. The People's Republic of China is formed in 1st of October 1949. So it is still less than 100 years. It is about 70-something years. So in terms of that, this is a new country. But in terms of the inheritance, the PRC inherited is 3,000, 4,000 written history, continuous, unbroken. Chinese unbroken history provide our leaders with a lot of examples. And during this long period, China has been up and down and up and down and up and down all the times. Usually the cycle is about 200 to 250 years, each cycle. That is reflected in terms of the Chinese history's dynasties. We have the first unified China in the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. From there onwards, we have the dynasty up and down, up and down. Around China, there are many other countries, Koreans, Japan. To the south, we have Vietnam, we have Cambodia, and then over in the west, we have the stands, Kyrgyzstan, wherever stand, and including Afghanistan, etc. And in the north, today we can include Mongolia, but Mongolia is part of China during the Mongol Empire. But over there, we have the Russia, or previously Soviet Union. So the countries in Southeast Asia had coexisted with China for thousands of years. We all know that China is not going to go away. There's no way suddenly this land disappear, or all the people on this land disappear. There's another scenario is like Soviet Union. Will the political system that exists today on the land which we call China today continue to exist in its current form? I will argue, yes, it probably will, and will probably, like all the cycles in China, last 200 years, 250 years, sometimes less, sometimes more, but it is still relatively young, less than 100 years. So we expect the current political system in China will last, on average, maybe another 100 years and more. So all the countries in Asia has coexisted with this huge, big China for thousands of years. And during this time, when China is strong, it didn't go out and conquer or colonize the other countries around China. Otherwise, every Asian country will be Chinese. But we know that it is not. That means China hasn't colonized all these smaller countries. In terms of size, from landmass to population, China is huge. Just until last year, I think, China is still the most populous country in the world, 1.3, 1.4 billion people. India, close by, 1.3, 1.4. And recently, it overtook China and becomes the most populous country in the world. So beside these two large population countries, the third most populous country is actually United States. But it is small compared with both China and India in terms of population. It has about 340 million people. So it is about a quarter the size of either China or India. And the fourth one is Indonesia. So in terms of land size, China is probably is the third or fourth largest country in terms of land size. So Asia countries has coexisted with this giant in terms both of its land mass, in terms of population, and also in terms of its development, civilization. China lead the world in many areas by hundreds of years for the last almost 3,000 years. We talk about the four ancient discovery or invention being the gunpowder, the compass, paper, and printing. And if we want to include more, we have the ceramic or China, where China is known, silk, tea, etc., all originated from China. For example, paper making. China lead the world by about 700 years. Printing, another thing, lead the rest of the world by another 700 years, and so on. Many of these civilization inventions is the result of very keen competition within China. And when a dominant product becomes available in China, it forms a strong monopoly. And outside countries like Korea, Japan, actually learned a lot from China. So therefore, we have the Chinese characters being used in both Korea and Japan. And Vietnam also have used Chinese characters, but recently they change it into alphabetic. Before that is again Chinese language. So China has a huge impact on the development on the countries around China. So the countries in China, around China in Asia, learned how to coexist with China for thousands of years. So it is only a continuation of this coexistence. But unfortunately, the perception has been managed by the West and changed quite a bit. So this is a perception in 2024. A couple of screenshots, and this published in April the 3rd in a so-called the State of Southeast Asia survey. And it focused on the influence of China in the region. So it's compared with 2023 and 2024. The first question is, if Asian Asian countries, the citizens in Asian countries, were forced to align themselves with one of these two rivalries. Which would you choose? 2023 is still US leading, and in 2024, it has switched. Although marginally, they are almost equally split. Something had happened between 2023 and 2024, which caused a major shift in perception of forming an alliance. Obviously, we know that China doesn't form any alliance with any country. So this is a hypothetical question. Rank the foreign dialogue partners in order of strategic relevance to the Asian country. The leading one is China, followed quite closely the United States, and then falling off pretty sharply Japan, European Union, Korean, United Kingdoms, Australia. We Australia are an Asian country. We are in the Pacific. And then falling down. Interesting is that India is not comparable even to the European Union. That's quite interesting. I just talked about the India is now the most populous country in the world, but still its importance in the mind of the Southeast Asia people, it is not ranked that high. Which region has the most economic and political influence in Southeast Asia? So in terms of economic influence, the red part, which is China, has increased from the middle, 59%, it's almost the same. For the political influence, it increased. Again, 2023 and 2024 have something which caused people's perception changed. China's community with a shared future for mankind. A vision that can be complementary to Asian efforts, considered that to be the case 31%. A positive, beneficial to Southeast Asia, 30%. So these two add up to about 2/3, which will potentially worsen your positive impression of China. So looking at the two diagram, one is on the left, one is on the right. On each color, the left one is 2023, and the right is 2024. So it seems that most of the potential has dropped, except one, which is the red one. Strong arm tactics in the South China Sea. So we will talk about South China Sea a little bit later on. How confident you are that the China will do the right thing? Again, the change is against China. More people in 2024 have low or little confidence that China will do the right thing. What can China do to improve the relationship? Again, I'm more interested in looking at the change. The first one, almost 7% change, is resolve the territory and maritime disputes. So we have to ask, is there really a maritime or territorial disputes between countries. Why that perception? Of course, with that, the second one is easy to understand because that involves a sovereignty. Once you talk about boundaries, then you always involve sovereignty. So that was a perception. So what is the reality? Again, I'm looking at several trade agreements. The first one is the China-Asian Free Trade Agreement. The one in blue are the Asian countries, the main one. And then the one down there is actually included New Zealand and Australia. It is a free trade area among 10 members of the Asian countries plus China. So it is called Asian plus. They first proposed the idea in 2000, November. Now, the year 2000 is important in two senses. First of all, it is the beginning of the 21st century. And secondly, in 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization. And from there onwards, by 2011, China overtook Japan to become the second largest economy. And by 2014, April, if you measure it by purchasing power, PPP, then China becomes the largest country, the largest economy in the world. But again, China has 4 times the population of United States. Therefore, even when China is the largest country, the per capita GDP is still a quarter of the United States. And from a quarter capita GDP to equal to average GDP, let's say half of America's, then there is still a lot of growth to be expected. So in the following year, 2001, in Brunei, then they established this Asian-China Free Trade Area. So the framework was signed on November 2002 in Cambodia. The first stage is 6 of these signatory countries. Aim to eliminate 80% of their tariffs on their products. Between 2003 and 2008, the trade between China and Asian country grew from almost 60 billion to almost 200 billions, almost a 3 times increase in a short time of 5 years. 5 years, 3 times increase in trade. Now, once the 6 signatory countries established their goal by 2010, the rest come online. The members of Asian country represent 650 million, are half the size of China. Half the size of China. The average tariff on Chinese goods sold in the Asian country fall from 12.8% to 0.6%, almost close to zero, while the average tariff on the Asian goods sold in China decreased from 9.8% to 0.1%. it is really a free trade agreement. Almost no trade tariff is applied to almost all the goods. Here is another look at the change. The top one is trade total and the trade balance. The trade balance is measured from the point of China. China is having a negative trade balance with Asian countries. Now, remember, China has always maintained a positive trade balance with the rest of the world combined. But for Asian countries, China maintained a negative trade balance. Okay, the next hot question is, of course, this South China Sea. This is some description of the boundary. South China Sea is important from 3 points of view. The number one, 3.4 trillion of the world's 16 trillion shipping go through South China Sea, a very significant amount of trade. The second, there are oils and natural gas found in the area. And it is also a very important fishing area. It represents 40% of the world's commercial fishing in 2010. So South China Sea is important in these three aspects. Okay, now, most of this trade, 3.4 trillion trade, of course, some of them will go to other countries like Japan, Korea, Philippines, and so on. But the bulk of that trade, that shipping, is related to China. So when the United States, they want to protect the trade routes, again, the question from home, from China, is China going to disrupt this trade route? On the other hand, it was China who worries if this trade route is interrupted, it will have significant impact on China's energy, economy, trade, etc. So the country which want to protect the trade route most is probably China rather than America. In terms of the oil and natural gas found in the area, we are now entering the green energy era. Hopefully, the world, as promised by the Paris Agreement, will try to achieve carbon zero by 2050. Today is already 2024. If we are to develop the oil fields and the gas field in South China Sea, and if we are going to stick with this zero carbon commitment, then these oil field and gas fields will be operational only for about 10 to 15 years. Because developing a gas field or oil field takes years, let's say 5 years. Then we have at most a 20 years lifespan for these oil fields and gas field. And usual lifespan of a oil field and gas field is 60 years. So it is expected only cost about 1/3. Of course, it doesn't mean that by the time the world achieve carbon zero, the oil field and the gas field will not be used. But the existing oil field and gas field in Middle East, etc., should be able to continue supply of the oil and petroleum, etc. So I don't see the oil and natural gas reserve to be a significant issue in South China Sea. Maybe other people may have another opinion. In terms of being the fisheries, it represents 40%. It's a significant fishery areas. So I think it is to the interest of all the countries around South China Sea to protect this fishery area. So the first one is, of course, the trade. A huge amount of trade go through that, as I have described. Some of them go to Russia, some go to South Korea, Japan, or the U.S. Pacific coast. Then, of course, some of our trade with China also go through South China Sea. Some of those trade also go to Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and so forth. So the largest trade amount is actually going to China. In terms of who owns the South China Sea, it is a very interesting question. And then the answer depends on at which point you cut the history. If you cut the history 300 years ago, then you include all the pre-colonization area to the most indigenous people. For example, Australia here. The British arrived here in what? 17 something. So about 300 years ago. So if we cut it at just before colonization, this land shouldn't belong to the Commonwealth. It should be the indigenous people. Or so is America, etc. But you cut that timeline to say after the Second World War, where a lot of countries became independent, then it's another issue. So when we look at who owned that piece of land, there are many different criteria. From historical point of view, another area to look at is who administrate the area in history. So the first recorded record of this South China Sea in Chinese history is 1000 BCE. So China had described this area at least 3,000 years. Moving to closer into the current system, in the Eastern Han Dynasty, that is 200 years after Christ, or the current era, China already established several different names of this area. And the name South China Sea, or simply South Sea, Namhai, is very well established in our Qing dynasty. Obviously, South China Sea is quite far away from China. But again, this measurement by distance have several counterexamples. I mentioned that last week. The British own the Falkland Islands in South America, which is really, really, really far away compared with South China Sea. So the distance may not be the best measure of whether a country owns the sovereignty of that land. But recognizing that China has always want to rise up in its economy, in its country's status, and the livelihood of people, Chinese want to have a peaceful rise, and therefore it tried to promote a dispute settlement. So there's a declaration on the conduct of parties in the South China Sea. This report is from 2012. Actually, much earlier than that, China is already having discussion with all the countries around South China Sea and establish a conduct of parties. So this is from the Declaration of Conduct of Party from the Asian.org. So this is the official record. I'm copying the first few lines there. The governments of the member state of ASEAN, that means the Asian country, and the government of the People's Republic of China, we affirm that, notice it is we affirm, that means this has already been established. Their determination and consolidate and develop the friendship and cooperation existing between their people and governments with a view to promoting a 21st century oriented partnership of good laborlessness, and mutual trust. The need to promote a peaceful, friendly, and harmonious environment in the South China Sea. Enhancement of peace, stability, economic growth, and prosperity. And then enhancing the principles and objectives of the 1997 joint statement of the meeting of the heads of state government of the member state and China, desiring to enhance favorable conditions for a peaceful, durable solution of differences and disputes among countries concerned. That means there was an existing mechanism where countries having dispute in this area can manage. So this reaffirmation is 2012. I think what happened later on has been publicized by Western media quite a bit. Remember, Philippines so-called set up a South China Sea claim at The Hague. The Hague mechanism, or the conduct of the sea mechanism, is a tribunal, meaning the parties in contest plus the Hague Council or the courts will try to negotiate a resolution. So when Philippines bring the issue up, it should have bring China in order to establish the tribunal, in order to establish a resolution. So that's point number one. And number two, the so-called court setup is not part of the United Nations. The so-called court rents a room in the building and claim to be part of United Nations. I don't know why United Nations will allow this so-called court to rent a room, but it is only a room. So it is a rental relationship between this so-called court and United Nations. Obviously, there is a lot of political manipulation behind it. Otherwise, I don't see any reason why a United Nations property will need a renter for a room. So because this is not part of the United Nations, China was not represented in the so-called tribunal. And so that means whatever argument put forth is one-sided. There's no counterside. So China never recognized the so-called resolution of the South China Sea claimed by Philippines. Then Philippines changed government. The last Filipino government has advanced a very good relationship with China, and they started establishing fishery and starting to establish a vision for South China Sea. The vision is that South China Sea will try to protect its ecology. That means its fishery as well as stopping the exploitation of the oil and gas and develop it into a tourist area. If South China Sea is established as a tourist area, the most beneficial country will be the country with the shortest distance from these tourist sites, meaning Vietnam and Philippines. So it was a good win-win situation with Chinese tourists coming into the South China Sea for a vacation and then being close, take a little flight to either Vietnam or to Philippines to extend its holiday. But obviously, the Philippine government changed again, and therefore all the good yields are gone now. Okay, this is another very important free trade agreement. Before the Trump administration, Obama established a partnership program called TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's meant to be an economic partnership in the Pacific to support better trade. But TPP includes most of the country here except one, the biggest one, China. China is the world's largest trading country. TPP establishment bar China from joining, meaning it is a method to contain China rather than really aiming for an economic partnership. But obviously, when Trump took the administration, TPP fall apart. China, in response, proposed this Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP. It includes, you can see from here, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and most of the Asian countries. So it is a lot of countries, 15 members, represent 30% of the world's population, 30% of the global GDP. Now, one country which is significant but not part of this RCEP is India. India is not included. But when the original idea is proposed, India was there. So India opted out, but was later invited to join at any time, no condition. Of course, such a economic partnership, it includes a lot of negotiations. India being opt out, That means it's also opt out from setting the policies and the rules in this partnership. When India rejoined, if ever, then it lost the opportunity of shaping the policy and rules to its advantage. I think India is making a very bad choice there. It was formally signed on 2020, November 15. So it is only about 4 years now, less than. And the composition is also very interesting. It includes high, middle, and low income countries. High income countries, of course, include Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand. Middle income country includes like China, and low income country may include the Philippines, the Vietnamese, and so on. It emphasized on establishing rules for e-commerce, trade, and intellectual property. Several analysts predict that it would offer a significant economic gain for signatory states, boosting post-pandemic economic development, economic recovery. So this is a summary of the few major trading bloc. United States, Mexico, Canada. So that is the middle and Northern American bloc. $24.37 trillion. The European Economic Area, EU, 18.85 trillion. This RCEP, slightly bigger than the American, 25.84 trillion. Not much, just slightly larger. This is the import and export between RCEP country and China in the first quarter of 2022. So that was only that year, first quarter. Remember the trade pact was signed in 2020 and took effect on 1st of January 2020. So 2020 first quarter, the first 3 months, the volume is the light pink one, and the change, the percentage on a year-on-year basis. Export from China to RCEP countries increased to 11.1%. Imports to China also increased to by 3.2%. The increase by 11.1% is huge for 1 quarter. RCEP with the rest outside RCEP. So it represents about 30% of the global population, 30% of global GDP, and it trade with the rest of the world, again, similar, 33%. Total import and total export, import, 42%. United States, again, represent 37% of United States imports. Okay, that's the presentation today, and then come on the next several videos, I'm going to address some of the questions put forth last time. First of all, the person you see on the screen is Jerry something. I don't know his family name. He is a British policeman. He married a Chinese wife, and I think currently is living in China full time. He himself have bicycled to Tibet and Xinjiang, and then later on, he and his wife also bicycled to Xinjiang and Tibet. That means he had traveled on a bicycle, both by himself and with his wife, at least twice to these two areas. Obviously, he knows the people well. Unlike taking an airplane or a high-speed rail, if you travel by bicycle, that means you are stopping and stopping and stopping, and then every time you stop, you will interact with the local people, and then you will know more about the people's life and culture and so forth. So I think his take on China is pretty accurate. So he has a YouTube channel called Jerry's Take on China. So let's listen.
US experts keep getting China wrong. We can go back decades and find reports describing what China is about to do, but then China defied the critics and just did something different. Wherever you are, welcome to another of my takes on China. This time I'm looking at the USA, their politicians and their journalists who say China is a threat, military analysts who predict China is going to invade Taiwan next week or next year. Economists tell us China is just about to collapse, and behavioral psychiatrists or psychologists establish that Chinese people are unhappy. Yet China still hasn't invaded anyone. It's still growing. The IMF just visited and upgraded their forecast. International surveys, such as those by Harvard University or the Ipsos Global Happiness Index, tell us that China is a safe, stable place where satisfaction in government is more than double what any Western leader can claim. Wow. The simplistic reason they get it wrong is that US media deceives their readers. For example, information about that IMF visit to China appears in such a way that the IMF were critical. They weren't. One day after the IMF visit, Bloomberg reported with the headline, quote, China rejects $1 trillion housing rescue plan pitched by the IMF, misleading US readers into thinking the IMF offered China $1 trillion and China said, no thanks. What really happened was that the IMF suggested China use $1 trillion of Chinese taxpayers' money to bail out developers. To quote China's IMF Executive Director Zhang Zhengqing, we believe that we should continue to apply market-based rule of law principles in completing and delivering these units. He also suggested that this would be viewed as a precedent in future economic issues, and more bailouts might be expected in the future. China has consistently refused to bail out corrupt or inefficient businesses, so media misinformation is part of the problem, but it doesn't answer the question of why. The deeper reasons are cultural and psychological. It isn't racist to say it. We just don't think the same way. We don't act the same way when faced with the same set of stimuli, and we don't even look at things the same way. Many books and papers have been written to prove this, but the best evidence possible is the fact that even after all of these studies, highly qualified American experts still get these predictions wrong. Their politicians, military leaders, and economists aren't reading the right books. Even deeper reasons are societal, historical, educational, and religious. Militarily, China has never been an invader or a colonist, but for thousands of years, Europe was at war. From the Greek Empire right through to the Second World War, invasions, colonizations, and genocide have been a constant. The US came from that background. It was founded on someone else's land by religious pilgrims escaping persecution. It's hardly a surprise that they became the belligerent country that we know today. China has an unbroken 5,000 years of civilization. It's been the most important trading country in the world for many thousands of years and has re-emerged to be again after 100 years of humiliation. Confucius provided a philosophy based on harmony and respect. China embraced Buddhism and Taoism, which espoused peace, and for centuries has held on to a meritocratic system that ensures governance is only possible after great diligence and proven record of success. The US, having escaped from wars, religious persecution, and feudalism, instead of turning over a new leaf, went straight into their own Native American wars, a revolution against their parent, England, and a civil war against themselves, and into a period of colonialism where they took lands in the Pacific from Hawaii, in Asia from China through concessions, and in the Philippines from Spain. American philosophy is that might is right. Furthermore, they sincerely believe God gave them that right. War has become a bad habit for them. When there's a conflict, diplomacy takes a back seat, and the military takes action. Historically, when the US disagreed with another country or their own indigenous populations, they signed treaties, all of which they immediately broke. They invaded, killed, and occupied the enemy and its lands. Nowadays, they've added different tactics: sanctions, regime change, and proxy wars. China, despite having plenty of internal wars, has no history of invasion, occupation, or breaching treaties, international or local. In fact, quite the opposite. They have a record of honoring their commitments. American generals are trained to think that the enemy will resist. Chinese generals have read Sun Tzu's Art of War and know the best battle is the one that's avoided. Looking to governance, once again, apart from obvious media misinformation, there's a much deeper reason why so many people in the West believe China's population needs rescuing from their autocratic government, and it's cultural. Chinese people believe strongly in hierarchies, much more so than Westerners. When the boss says jump to the worker, he asks, "How high, boss?" When a Western boss does so, the worker asks, "Why? And what's in it for me?" In behavioral psychology, this is called power distance, and it applies throughout society. Chinese kids are generally more diligent at school and more obedient to their parents. Chinese adults are more compliant to laws, at least where there's a chance of getting caught. Where there's no chance of getting caught, then the law is taken as a bit of a guideline. Americans see this as part of an autocratic state. Chinese view this as normal governance. If the Chinese government says, for example, it's bad to insult the leader of the country, so we're going to make that illegal, Chinese people accept this. Americans start screaming about free speech because they want to insult their leaders. Chinese police manage the behavior of the people by counseling, warning, and eventually punishing. US police profit from the misbehavior of their people by fining, asset seizing, imprisoning, and forcing slave labor on those prisoners that they don't kill. When you have a 22% trust in government, it's little wonder that Americans demand that freedom to insult their government. It served them so badly. The Edelman Trust Barometer, a highly respected US PR tool, has listed China's trust in governance consistently in the high 80s and 90s. So even if it were allowed, insulting wouldn't be happening for two reasons. One is deep respect, and the other is deep satisfaction. Americans demand the right to criticize poor governance. Chinese just want to be well governed. China's governance suits Chinese people. Westerners might think their system of democracy is great, but the polls say differently. We're different in so many ways. Americans are individualists. Chinese are communal. Historically, Americans borrow money to entertain themselves, buy a nice car. Nowadays, as income inequality has bitten hard, they need to do so just to live. Chinese forego luxuries until they can afford them. They save their money. The average American has over $22,000 in debt, Most have no savings. China, on the other hand, according to the IMF, saved 46% of its GDP every year. Simply put, the West gets Chinese wrong because they aren't able to put themselves into Chinese shoes and walk the Chinese mile. Our histories, cultures, philosophies, education, and experiences make us so different. So unless experts understand these differences, their predictions will be based on their own culture, history, and experiences. Every time they make incorrect predictions, they tell themselves, if I was Chinese, this is what I would do. Except if they were Chinese, it isn't what they do at all. Look out for part 2 of this series, which will explain the many ways in which our media misinforms us.
Okay, so that is the first. I need to get the navigator to move to the next clip.
Mr. Dion, Amanda Connolly, iPolitics.ca. Thank you for taking our questions today. There are no shortage of concerns about China's treatment of human rights advocates, such as the Hong Kong booksellers and its detention of the Garretts, not to mention the destabilizing effects of its territorial ambitions in the South China Sea. Given these concerns, why is Canada pursuing closer ties with China? How do you plan to use that relationship to improve human rights and security in the region? And did you specifically raise the case of the Garretts during your discussions with the Foreign Minister today?
我要对刚才这个记者涉及到中国的问题，要做一个回应。
I want to make a response to the questions asked by this journalist about China.
你的提问充满对中国的偏见和所谓不知道从什么地方来的傲慢，我是完全不能接受。
I have to say that your question is full of prejudice and against China and arrogance, where I don't know where that come from, and this is totally unacceptable.
你了解中国吗？你去过中国吗？你知道中国从一个一穷二白的面貌，把6亿以上的人摆脱了贫困吗？你知道中国现在已经成为人均8000美元的一个世界第2大经济体吗？如果我们不能够很好的保护人权的话，中国能取得这么大的发展吗？你知道中国已经把保护人权列入到我们的宪法当中吗？我要告诉你，最了解中国的人权的状况不是你，而是中国人自己。你没有发言权，而中国有发言权。所以，请你不要再做这种不负责任的提问。中国欢迎一切善意的这种建议，但是我们拒绝任何无端的指责。
I have to ask whether you understand China. Have you been to China? Do you know that China has lifted more than 600 million people out of poverty? And do you know that China is now the second largest economy in the world from a very low foundation? Do you think development is possible for China without protection of human rights? And do you know that China has written protection and promotion of human rights into our constitution? And those who other people don't know better than the Chinese people about the human rights condition in China. And it's the Chinese people who are in the best situation, in the best position to have say about China's human rights situation. So I would like to suggest to you that please don't ask questions in such an irresponsible manner. And we welcome goodwill suggestions, but we reject groundless or unwarranted accusations.
Okay, I'm not going to follow this up. So here's one important question is the Western media constantly use a prejudice colored glass to look at China.
You said a lot of wonderful things about China, and surely they're doing a lot of things right. But how do you reconcile the fact that to make it work for China, it seems to be based on a high level of repression, environmental destruction, censorship, a certain ideological stubbornness. I mean, we've spoken about Hong Kong, the Uyghurs. how do you reconcile that, and why do you think that's? I mean, do you think that's tolerable?
Thank you. I'm really glad you asked that question because your question captured very well the Anglo-Saxon media's perception of China. And I would suggest to you very bluntly, there is a distorted perspective of reality. Let's take the first word you use, repression. If the Communist Party of China only relied on repression to stay in power, it would not create the most dynamic economy in the world, right? It is by far the most dynamic economy in the world. It has delivered the fastest growing economy for 30 years. And it has done this by educating the Chinese people to a level and extent that the Chinese people have never been educated ever before. And you say is repression. You obviously are taking the old Cold War mindset. In the year 2019, 139 million Chinese left China freely. Guess what? Zero defectors. 139 million Chinese, right? That's twice the population of the UK. Went back to China. So all your description, when you say environmental degradation, China's climate change policies are far more responsible than those of the United States, which has not once, but twice withdrawn from global environmental protocols. Kyoto Protocol, the Bush administration left 8 years. Paris Accords, Trump administration left 4 years. And you know what? The reason why we're having climate change today is not because of new flows of greenhouse gas emissions from China and India. It's because of what the Western countries have put in the atmosphere since the Western Industrial Revolution. Get the data. The single largest contributor cumulatively, right, is number 1, United States, number 2, Europe, number 3, China, right? And the West wants China to pay an economic price for the current flows, but the West doesn't want to pay an economic price for what it put in the atmosphere. You want to deprive the Indians of electricity when the United States could just, by the way, if the United States could impose $1 a gallon tax, that would save the world. Cut down gasoline consumption, raise money for investment in green technology. Simple solutions. And by contrast, the largest reforestation program in the world is carried out by China. It has already reforested an area the size of Belgium or bigger, right? So all your descriptions capture the natural distortions of China that you get in the Anglo-Saxon media, which violate the rules of the Enlightenment, which say that you must be rational, calm, and objective, especially in understanding your adversary. And if the Chinese were as stupid and as incompetent as you describe them to be, don't worry about them. But I can assure you, you are now dealing with a far more intelligent and rational actor that doesn't fit any of the Anglo-Saxon categories that you applied to them. Please forgive my bluntness.
It's really blunt. Okay, the last one is also from Jerry.
Xinjiang or Tibet, invasion or liberation? Controversial questions, and questions that state media here probably would never ask, but I did, because I really wanted to know the answer from the mouths of local people. I have enough B-roll to make several more videos about Xinjiang, but to show some of the sites that I saw there as well. And I will do so in a couple more days. But today, I just wanted to get the elephant out of the room and cover the controversial issues. We'll keep the sightseeing for later. Wherever you are, welcome to another of my takes on China, my third video about my first visit to Tibet, which from now on, I'm going to call Xizang. Sorry about my voice. A message to the Tibetan community first. In places like Washington, you're very well organized. I can make a dozen videos about my experience of Xinjiang, and I might get 1 or 2 comments from the Uyghur diaspora. And in fact, 99% of the comments coming from Uyghur named accounts are quite positive, thanking me for telling the truth. There are almost no negative comments on my Twitter, X, or YouTube accounts when I talk about Xinjiang. But mention Xizang, it's a very different story. Tibetan named accounts hit me by the dozen. First of all, thank you for watching, if indeed you did. If you watched and have a comment that isn't name calling, please make it. Ask your questions, challenge my opinions, but do so politely. I'm not a liar. I have an experience that I'm sharing, and if you don't like it, not because it isn't true, it's because it disagrees with your experience. So if you decide to challenge me, support that challenge by telling me and other readers of your experience, and do so with facts to support your challenge and with courtesy. If your parents or your grandparents left the region in the 1950s, then I'm sorry. While your opinions are valid, they're no longer relevant. You need to have some on-the-ground experience to hold an opinion on how people live and what they think there. Please do not cite anonymous relatives in the region. The contradiction of Xizang being an oppressed state and your relatives being under surveillance but still able to meet you on Facebook, Telegram, or WhatsApp just doesn't stack up. For the record, my VPN worked perfectly there in all the places I visited. And I even conducted a live stream with Robbie Barwick from my Lhasa hotel room, which is also posted on this channel. Let's start with the name. Historically, the name Tibet in local language is Bud. So if China has changed it, we should not consider this as some kind of cultural appropriation, because the name most of the world uses, Tibet, is not local anyway. It's been adopted by those of us outside China as a name to use in our own language. Like the name China is not used inside China, it's Zhongguo. And Beijing has fairly recently been changed from the anglicized Peking to reflect its true name as used in the country. It's about time the name used in the country is the same as the name used outside the country. The name Tibet is derived from the Mongolian Tibet, the Chinese Tufan, Thai Tibet, and the Arabic Tibet. So let's not get too upset that it's being changed. People of Tibet are known as the Chang, and the Chinese word for west is Xi. So the region is now named in Chinese by China after the people who live there. I don't know how ridiculous magazines like Newsweek think they appear when they accuse China of attempting to erase Tibetan culture by changing a word that doesn't even come from the region. Now, let's come to the question of whether it was invaded or liberated. And that's a confusing one for many people. Sure, an army went in. So technically, people might call that an invasion.
Okay, I will stop here because obviously you can do a search on Jerry's channel, Jerry's Take on China 799. You don't put in 799, you can still find his channel. And then obviously this video I think is about 1 year old. So if you go to his channel, you probably get more recent videos. And I think he is one of those few Westerners living long-term, because he married a Chinese wife and living long-term with a pretty accurate understanding of at least the United Kingdom. He was a police officer before he went to China. And for the early days, he actually was consulting the Chinese police on how to do investigations. But obviously now he had retired and he is traveling around China. I think he also might have a cafe or something like that. I don't know. I'm not sure. But anyway, I will stop here so that you may ask me questions. So anyone with any questions, you are welcome to unmute yourself and then ask me.
Excuse me, Albert.
Yes.
Will these lectures be that you're giving us, and which I've enjoyed very much, will they be on YouTube?
Yeah, they will be on YouTube. I will upload this after, let's say, 3 o'clock local time. After the software convert into the format necessary, of course.
Thank
you. You can search my YouTube channel. I have the Albert Yip second channel, which will be mainly in English. My main channel is in Cantonese. So you search Albert Yip, then you will end up with my main channel, which is in Cantonese mostly.
Albert, your name is that?
Albert Yip.
Yip, IP?
IP, yes.
Okay. On where? Telegram or YouTube or?
Mainly YouTube. I don't do other social media.
Okay. Now that I'm here, I'll ask you a question. In most of these talks, when the respondent was referring to the question, they were mentioning that this is the mindset of the Western powers or something.
Yeah.
So my question is it only a misunderstanding of the Western governments of the Chinese behavior that leads to this sort of issues, or do they have a different agenda and they are actually utilizing this excuse to attack China?
Very good question. I think that the answer is affirmative. Yes, I think so. The Americans, which is almost every day in my focus on criticizing Americans. One of the main issue with the current American governments is what their President Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. I think the current US governments suffer from the multi-party politics. Politicians, for example, the president, need to have huge funding in order to win election. And in order to have this huge funding, there are lobby groups. The lobby groups fund these campaigns. The lobby groups is also had to be funded. Where the lobby groups get their money. The Americans is the largest defense budget country in the world by a large margin. I think this year is about 800 billion. So let's say the military-industrial complex take 1% of that money, that will be 8 billion. Divided by the number of politicians in both the Senate and the House. So that is about 550 something people, let's say 500. So 8 billion divided by 500 will be 40 million. Annually, every year, $40 million to convince one politician in either the House or the Senate to support funding of the military. That's only 1% of the funding. And of course, that funding was distributed to different contractors and companies. So different countries may put forward different amount of money, but that it will be money well spent. Take 1% of your money to secure the 100% of your funding is a very good deal. With that in mind, that means there's another critical requirement for this military industrial complex to continue to work, is to have an enemy. If you don't have the enemy, it doesn't satisfy putting so much money in military. So how do you get an enemy? Well, by creating one, either real or imaginary. When let's say in a criminal gang, there's a number one group in the area. It has been ruling the area. Then another group surge up, becoming the second largest and going to challenge your position in the area. What do? Kill your competitors before it challenge you. So traditionally, Americans has been killing the second largest economy all the time. Remember Japan in the 1980s? Or when the European Union is first formed? Or how do you explain why Russia, with Moscow as capital in Europe, unable to join European Union? Why? Does it make sense for Russia to join European Union with Russia's huge reserve in oil, gas, and all other commodities, plus the industrial strength of Germany? You can imagine how good Europe will be with cheap energy, with technology. Now remember, the previous Soviet Union is very much in advance than America. The first satellite, Sputnik, was sent by Russia, by Soviet Union, not United States. Russia is also the first country, Soviet Union is also the first country to send men in space. Russia or Soviet Union is also the first country to soft land a object on moon. The largest airplane was also made by the Soviet Union. While the West has conquered, Soviet Union also have a supersonic commercial aircraft, which unfortunately, of course, it doesn't come to fulfillment because its size is too small compared with the rest of the world. So Soviet Union was the enemy. But when Soviet Union collapsed, it desperately needs another enemy. And it desperately doesn't want Russia to join force with the rest of Europe to challenge Americans' position. So with that in mind, you can start understanding the geopolitics of the world. The main problem comes from the multi-party system in America. And for multi-party system to work, it needs money to campaign. You need money to campaign, you need supporting groups, or they call it lobbying groups. I would call it corruption. And the lobby groups get the money from sources. I just give you one example, and it is hypothetical. We have no evidence that 1% of the contribution of defense was routed back to the multiple lobby groups, but that is pretty easy to understand. So yes, it was deliberate. The MIC, military industrial complex, should now evolve to be called MIMAC, MIMAC, military industrial media academic complex. Media is now coming into the equation, as well as a lot of the academics in the universities. So when we look at the research report, we look at the newspapers, just remember, they are no longer objective. We have to apply our understanding of the issues in order to really understand the real world. Okay, any other questions? Yes, please.
Hi, Albert. Thank you. How do you pronounce the name of China in China? How do you pronounce it?
中国.
中国.
Yeah.
中国.
中 meaning middle. Middle 国 is country, middle country. 中国, middle country.
中国. Okay. And who does Taiwan mostly trade with?
Sorry, again?
Who does Taiwan mostly trade with? Because they're not in any of those trading organizations.
Now, PRC represent China in United Nations is after Nixon's visit to China and normalization of relationship between United States and China. So before that, after the Second World War, when United Nations first formed, it was represented by ROC, Republic of China, which is the government of Taiwan. So traditionally, there are embassies around the world in the name of Republic of China rather than People's Republic of China. One letter difference. The current government in mainland China is People's Republic of China, whereas the government in Taiwan is Republic of China. So there's only the people's different at the beginning, okay? But once China joined the United Nations, the condition is that United Nations agreed with that one China policy. And therefore, all embassies from ROC, Republic of China, downgraded to offices rather than embassy. So there are the trade and cultural office representation of Taiwan.
And who do they mostly trade with?
Yeah, and therefore Taiwan trade with the rest of the world as a part of the Chinese, as a Chinese province. Because China consider Taiwan as a province of China, and Taiwan consider mainland China as part of Republic of China. Both of them have this one China policy, right? But the difference is who govern the country.
But in their capacity of having offices in different countries, who are their most important trading countries with the Republic of China?
I reverse that question and then answer you from a different end. The major product from Taiwan are agricultural products. For example, pineapples, etc., is a main produce from Taiwan, but they are usually sold to Asian countries, including China, mainland China. The other major product from Taiwan is semiconductor. The world's largest semiconductor foundry making chips, making semiconductors is TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Company. TSMC. At the top of this manufacturing of the chips, TSMC by itself represent about 62% of the world's production. 62%. And then followed by Samsung, and then another company in China, SMIC. Both of them represent about 16% of the world's chip manufacturing. So these three companies combined, TSMC, Samsung, and the one in China, represent about 90% of the world's semiconductor manufacturing and design. So the main produce of Taiwan goes to everywhere else, including mainland China. Chinese consume about 60% of the world's semiconductor products. And TSMC manufactures 60%. So a huge amount of that actually go into China. So you ask which is the largest trading partner, mainland China.
Yeah. Albert,
yes.
Albert, I couldn't find your second channel on YouTube. I don't know how to search it. Can you just give me the?
Okay, I will put the channel reference on the chat. So just hang on a sec. Dashboard, my channel. Control C. Chat. Okay, I put the link to my channel on the chat so you can.
Oh, I can. It's too fast. I didn't get it.
Okay. Next term we will continue. I think I have already decided the topics, but that will be announced through our newsletter and so on. So we'll see you next time.
Can you put that?
Thank you.
Can you put that reference in the U3A letter?
Okay, I will tell the U3A letters. Yeah.
Yeah, because
okay.
It's too fast. I couldn't catch it. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Albert.
You're welcome back. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.